The night air above Naval Air Station North Island carried the precise metallic scent of ozone and high-octane fuel, a perfume only those who live on the edge of the flight envelope truly recognize. Inside the Admiral's mess, however, the dominant smell was polish. Polished brass, polished oak, and the aggressively confident fragrance of men who believe they own the vertical space above them. This wasn't a party. It was a hierarchy celebration, an acknowledgement of a successful deployment that had just put 6 fast attack destroyers back in the Pacific rotation faster than the Pentagon projected. Everyone here wore their achievement like armor, specifically polished, perfectly pressed armor that shouted their lineage and their position on the food chain. And then there was Santos. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't mingling. She was leaning against a reinforced pillar near the rarely used service entrance, looking completely out of place, yet utterly intentional. She wore standard issue, sand-colored Nomex flight line coveralls. No patches, no name tag, just the faint indelible stains of hydraulic fluid and desert dust, marking the fabric near the cuffs. Her hair, the color of wet obsidian, was pulled back into a severe, functional bun. She was unremarkable, which, to anyone truly paying attention, made her the single most remarkable presence in the room. Her eyes were fixed, not on the parade of gold braid and service ribbons, but on a low-voltage junction box near the HVAC return vent. She was monitoring, calculating, absorbing the pulse of the environment. Every clink of crystal, every shift in the weight distribution of the crowd, every slight fluctuation in the ambient temperature, it was data. To the officers in dress whites, she was merely furniture, perhaps a highly paid technician waiting for someone to authorize overtime, an invisible utility worker. That anonymity, that deliberate lack of adornment, was exactly what drew the attention of Lieutenant Commander Thorne. Thorne was exactly what the Navy thought looked good on recruiting posters. Broad-shouldered, impeccably groomed, with the kind of confident swagger that had been reinforced by 2 successful tours flying the new F-35 variants. He had just finished explaining, loudly, how his tactical decisions had saved 3 days in the maintenance cycle. A technical victory he was already translating into a promotion point. He needed a minor inconvenience, a low-stakes target, to complete his perceived dominance of the space. He saw Santos, this small, quiet woman in drab fatigues, occupying prime real estate near the egress point, and decided she was it. She was breaking the visual harmony of his victory lap. Thorne straightened his tie, the motion sharp and military, and navigated the periphery of the room, his white uniform cutting a path through the darker blues. The hum of conversation followed him, anticipating the inevitable friction. When he reached her, he didn't stop fully. He merely paused, leaning slightly into the pillar, exuding patronizing authority. "Excuse me," Thorne said, his voice dropping just enough to be audible only to her, giving the interaction the guise of a private disciplinary issue, yet loud enough to catch the ears of the 3 majors discussing fleet logistics 10 feet away. Santos didn't flinch. She shifted her focus from the junction box to Thorne's face. The movement was economical, the turn of the neck almost imperceptible. Her expression remained neutral, neither antagonistic nor submissive. It was the gaze of an auditor reviewing faulty data. "Sir?" she responded, her voice low, raspy, and completely devoid of regional accent, a voice carefully stripped of distinguishing characteristics. Thorne chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound that bounced off the polished wood paneling. "The term is Lieutenant Commander, or perhaps Skipper, if you're feeling generous. But we'll stick with Sir for now, since you seem to be operating without the benefit of a visible rank structure." He gestured vaguely at her Nomex suit. "This is the Admiral's mess, technician, not the air conditioning closet. Are you waiting for authorization to clear some biohazard, or are you just admiring the view?" Santos kept her hands loosely clasped in front of her. She noted the slight tension in Thorne's left shoulder, the way his jaw was marginally clenched, a telltale sign of someone performing dominance for an audience. "I am waiting for authorized transport, Lieutenant Commander," she stated plainly. "Authorized transport," Thorne repeated, drawing out the words with theatrical skepticism. "Right, and this authorized transport is taking you—" "Where, exactly? Back to the grease pit? Because frankly, your attire is making our guests feel like they might need a tetanus shot." The 3 majors across the room exchanged knowing glances. Thorne was delivering textbook rank prank behavior, humiliating the junior or unranked staff member to elevate his own perceived stature among peers. It was petty, predictable, and in this environment, tragically effective. My destination is classified, Lieutenant Commander, Santos replied. Her calm was unnerving. It wasn't the calm of fearlessness. It was the calm of operational necessity. Her pupils hadn't dilated. Her breathing hadn't quickened. She was a barometer set to zero storm. Thorne felt a spike of frustration. This was supposed to be easy, a simple one-line dismissal. Her operational silence was disrupting the script. Classified. Of course it is, Thorne scoffed, taking a half-step closer, invading her personal space. His expensive cologne, sandalwood, and sea salt now overpowered the scent of ozone. Look, technician, I run a tight ship. We don't have unidentified personnel loitering in secure facilities, particularly during sensitive briefings. I need you to identify yourself fully, including your assigned unit and, critically, your rank. I need to know who I'm reporting for unauthorized access. He leaned in further, making his tone aggressive and low. Are you a petty officer, a corporal? Or are you just some civilian contractor who thinks wearing green gives them clearance they haven't earned? Because if you're the latter, you're about to have a very bad night with base security. Santos met his eyes. Her gaze didn't hold anger or defiance. It held depth, the kind of depth seen in polarized lenses looking into a deep ocean trench. She saw the ambition, the impatience, the fundamental insecurity masked by the polished uniform. She saw the man, not the rank. She sighed internally, a thought that never reached the surface. This was tedious. The paperwork generated by unnecessary conflict was always the worst part of the job. Lieutenant Commander, she said, her voice dropping a fraction lower than his, forcing him to strain slightly to hear her. My clearance is current, my assignment is authorized, and my presence here is known to the appropriate authorities. That's not an answer, Thorne snapped, his control slipping slightly. He pointed sharply at her collar, where military rank insignia should have been pinned. I asked for your rank. This is a direct order. Failure to comply is grounds for immediate insubordination charges. And trust me, you don't want to explain to a review board why a lieutenant commander had to drag your designation out of you. He paused, letting the threat hang heavy. What is your rank? Santos looked down, not in submission, but as if genuinely considering the best tactical response to a ridiculously simple question. Her right hand, scarred subtly across the knuckles from high-friction contact, the kind of scarring earned holding onto things that don't want to be held, moved infinitesimally. She adjusted the cuff of her Nomex, exposing a sliver of her wrist. There was no watch, no jewelry, just taut, functional skin, save for a small, perfectly executed tattoo just above the ulna. A minute, stylized compass rose, entirely black, with the north point subtly elongated, piercing the central circle. It was meaningless to Thorne, but to certain organizations, it was an encrypted signature. My rank, Lieutenant Commander, she said, raising her eyes back to his, a flicker of something ancient and tired passing across her face, is Sergeant. Sergeant Santos. Thorne erupted in a low, strangled laugh. It was the laugh of absolute victory, confirming his lowest expectation. Sergeant, he repeated, savoring the word like a cheap insult. A sergeant, waiting for transport in the Admirals' mess. You're kidding me. E5? E6, at best. Did you lose a bet, Sergeant? Who let you in here? You are 3 levels of command below the absolute minimum requirement to breathe the air in this room without specific invitation. Now get out. Find a back door. Use the service tunnels. I don't care. But if I see your coveralls again, I will have you processed, documented, and scrubbing barnacles off a carrier hull by dawn. He stepped back, crossing his arms, puffing out his chest, completely confident he had reasserted the natural order. The 3 majors chuckled dutifully. The friction had been resolved. The lowest link had been broken. Thorne was victorious. Understood, Lieutenant Commander, Santos confirmed, the words utterly flat. And that was the exact calculated second the heavy, sound-dampening oak doors at the far end of the mess swung inward. The room, already subdued by the weight of rank, collectively went silent. All conversation stopped, frozen in mid-sentence, as if a master conductor had dropped his baton. 5 men entered the room, moving with the measured, unified gait of absolute, unquestioned power. They weren't just senior officers. They were the physical embodiment of the command structure of the Pacific Fleet. The collective glitter of their stars, gold and silver, was blinding, 4 of them wearing the insignia of vice or rear admirals, and the man leading them, a mountainous figure with hair the precise shade of fresh snow, bore the 4 silver stars of a fleet admiral. Admiral Hayes, the man who commanded everything that floated, flew, or swam in half the world's oceans. The atmosphere in the mess shifted instantaneously, thickening with palpable deference. Every officer in the room, Thorne included, snapped to attention, backs straight, jaws tight, ready to render a salute that held both respect and terror. Thorne, basking in his moment of disciplinary triumph, was just about to pivot and offer a crisp, perfect salute to Admiral Hayes, eager to be seen by the most powerful man in the room, maintaining order. But Admiral Hayes wasn't looking at him. None of them were. Their eyes, the minute they swept the room, locked onto the far pillar, the small figure in the sand-colored Nomex. There was a microsecond of stunned silence, followed by the most profound, agonizingly slow shift in perspective Thorne had ever witnessed. It was like watching a physics demonstration where gravity suddenly decides to pull sideways. Admiral Hayes, the man whose word moved aircraft carriers, stopped dead in his tracks. His four companions, equally star-laden, stopped in perfect unison behind him. The Admiral's imposing, powerful frame actually softened, the aggressive posture of command draining away, replaced by something deep, solemn, and intensely respectful. Thorne, still rigid, waited for the Admiral to proceed, perhaps to address the room, but Hayes didn't acknowledge the crowd. He took one deliberate step forward, then another, his eyes never leaving Santos. Thorne was directly in the Admiral's line of sight, perhaps 10 feet from Santos. He finally rendered his salute, a sharp textbook motion. Hayes didn't return it. He didn't even register Thorne's presence. Thorne's salute died, hanging awkwardly in the air. Hayes continued his approach toward the pillar. As he drew closer, the Admiral's face, a roadmap of decades of command stress, displayed a level of focused, respectful attention Thorne had only seen directed toward the Secretary of Defense. Then, the impossible happened. Admiral Hayes reached the pillar and stopped directly in front of Santos, the sergeant Thorne had just ordered to scrub barnacles. Instead of demanding identification or correction, Admiral Hayes, Fleet Admiral, Commander of the Pacific, slowly, deliberately lowered his head. It was not a nod of greeting. It was a profound, almost reverent bow, a bow that required the Admiral to break the plane of his spine, an act of submission utterly alien to his rank. The four other admirals instantly followed suit, their collective gesture shattering the rigid rules of military decorum. 5 admirals, 5 clusters of silver and gold stars, bowed before the plain figure in the technician's jumpsuit. The sound in the room became a vacuum. The silence pressed against the eardrums, punctuated only by the distant rhythmic whine of a jet spooling up on the runway outside. Thorne, standing perhaps 5 feet away, felt the blood drain from his head. He could feel the eyes of the 3 majors burning into the back of his neck. The reality hit him with the physical force of a tidal wave, a slow, relentless crushing. Santos, the sergeant, didn't bow back. She didn't salute. She gave Admiral Hayes a tiny, almost weary nod of acknowledgement, a gesture reserved for an equal, or perhaps a senior. Admiral Hayes straightened up, but his posture remained softened, attentive. He spoke, his voice low and serious, not booming, as was his custom, but deferential. "Ma'am," Hayes began, using the formal address, "we were informed of your need for immediate extraction. We are prepared to initiate the protocol." He glanced quickly at the area around Santos, noticing Thorne's lingering presence, his expression instantly hardening from respect to glacial displeasure. "Is there a complication, ma'am?" Hayes asked Santos, the implied question hanging heavily. "Has this junior officer caused you trouble?" Santos looked at Thorne. Her eyes, those deep, unreadable eyes, met his. The entire crushing weight of Thorne's colossal error settled onto his shoulders. He felt the sweat break out cold across his temples. He tried to speak, tried to apologize, to step back, to vanish, but his throat had seized. Santos turned back to Hayes, dismissing Thorne with a glance that lasted less than a second, yet felt like 1,000 years of judgment. "No complication, Admiral," she said simply, "just confirming nomenclature." The admirals behind Hayes shifted uneasily, understanding the coded reference. Nomenclature. Rank. Admiral Hayes's gaze flickered back to Thorne, and the lieutenant commander felt his promising career evaporate like mist in the heat. Hayes didn't need to speak to Thorne. The admirals didn't need to be introduced. One of the vice admirals, a man known for his ruthlessness in fleet readiness, stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Thorne. He ignored the rank on Thorne's collar, addressing him simply as a nuisance. "Officer," the Vice Admiral barked, the sound sharp enough to shatter glass. "You will retire to your quarters immediately. Do not speak of this moment. Do not move until ordered. Understand?" Thorne could only manage a strangled, choked noise that might have been, "Sir." Admiral Hayes then stepped closer to Santos, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "The briefing package for the new deployment is secured, ma'am. The Secretary sends his best and asked me personally to confirm your satisfaction with the new comms suite, specifically the latency on the orbital package." "The latency is fine, Admiral," Santos confirmed. "The payload is stable." "Tell the Secretary that Mantis is satisfied." Mantis. The name hit Thorne like a physical blow. Mantis, the legendary call sign, the operative that intelligence rumors claimed had been retired 20 years ago. The ghost whose operational history was locked behind the most classified security clearance the U.S. government possessed. The shadow who designed the counterinsurgency algorithms that every admiral in the room depended on. Mantis wasn't a sergeant in the conventional sense. The sergeant rank was the cover, the perpetual, non-promotable, non-transferable designation given to black operations directors and legendary strategic analysts whose true authority dwarfed the standard chain of command. Her nominal rank was E5 or E6, a protective shell that masked the fact that she was, operationally, the one-person 5 four-star admirals referred to as ma'am. She was the legend, the quiet force that dictated the movements of the entire fleet. Thorne felt the cold, hard realization. He hadn't just mocked a technician. He had challenged the bedrock of operational security and the strategic mind of the entire naval command. Hayes offered his arm to Santos, a gesture of profound respect and escort. "Your flight is ready, ma'am. The general is waiting on the tarmac." Santos accepted the escort with the ease of someone accustomed to moving among the very apex of power. As she turned to leave, walking slowly through the corridor of bowing admirals, she paused one last time, her eyes drifting back to Thorne, who remained frozen, a statue of petrified pride. Her expression shifted, no longer judgment, but a quiet, weary pity. She lifted her right hand slightly, showing him the small stylized compass rose tattoo on her wrist. The silent message was clear. "I am where I am supposed to be, moving according to the plan. You are the one who is lost." She then walked out, flanked by the 5 most powerful naval commanders in the region, their stars dimming slightly as they passed under the harsh fluorescence of the doorway, dissolving the strange, inverted hierarchy into the classified shadows of the night. Thorne was left standing alone in the profound, crushing silence of the mess hall, the smell of sandalwood and sea salt now smelling aggressively foolish. His career, the polished brass, the immaculate uniform, it all felt cheap, tarnished, and deeply, terribly inadequate. He had learned the hardest lesson the military could teach. Rank on the collar is merely a uniform. Authority is etched in scar tissue and whispers in high places. If you believe respect is earned by blood and not by rank, type respect in the comments.